You're listening to the Changing Safety Podcast with Paul
Welcome everybody. This is Paul Clark, the owner and director of HSE Global Series, and you're listening to the Changing Safety Podcast. So this is a bi-weekly podcast dedicated to challenging the safety narrative by championing different ideas and selling different as a movement to bring innovation and real change to the profession. Let's think outside the box together and have the confidence to do things differently. So I'm really excited today to bring James Pomeroy to the table to have a conversation about how we need to be pushing outside the box, challenging the normalities of the profession, and thinking and collaborating together to do things differently. So let's get started. How are you, James?
Very good, thank you, Paul. Very good indeed. Looking forward to speaking to you.
Good stuff. So just as I guess an introduction, really, talk to us a little bit. I know lots about you, but let's talk to our listeners about who you are, where you came from, what your background is, and what you do now within your role.
So I'm the Global Health and Safety Leader at an organisation called Arup that is driven towards sustainable solutions. I've spent probably between 25 and 27 years involved in leading safety, particularly in kind of global organizations in a number of sectors, both in aerospace, industrial engineering, and marine, the built environment. So yeah, a kind of a range of kind of backgrounds, and particularly in other areas of risk like sustainability, and also looking at the broader kind of risk agenda, including product quality and product safety and process safety.
Wow. And safety as a profession for you, what was it that made you go down that road? What was it that sort of made you think this is somewhere I want to, leave a legacy and put my time and space into?
Well, like many, safety was a calling for me. When I was an engineer very early on in my career, three colleagues that I was working with, one of which was very dear to me, all died within a space of about a year and a half from asbestosis. And so rather than carrying on with a career involved in engineering, it was kind of a bit life-changing, particularly to see colleagues that you had dealt with on a day-to-day basis, all of which passing away within a very short period of each other. So I don't know whether we believe in kind of fate, but it certainly for me was something that was kind of transformative in my outlook and seeing the impact when we get safety wrong.
So personal experience was what brought you.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of discussions in safety about procedures and process and, different types. For me, safety is something that is dear. It's about the impact that it has on individuals. It's about an issue of equity and fairness. I see it through the lens of diversity and inclusion. And equally, I see it as something that is kind of very fundamental to what organizations should do as part of their social responsibility. Not just for their employees, but they think more broadly. If we think kind of about some of the catastrophes and incidents that have happened recently, a lot of those are safety issues, but they're not solely about the safety of their people. They're about the safety of their operations, the transportation, and equally the safety of their products and services. So taking a wider view of safety and thinking about how it affects everybody in society brings a different perspective to it. Safety is an issue of equity, fairness, and social responsibility.
Wow. If we were to look at where the safety profession has come from, we had, a fast track from the 70s into today. There was a period of, incremental improvements. Then we hit this plateau. From where you started in the profession to where you are today, what do you think has changed?
I think going back to something I said a moment ago, I think we take a broader view of safety now. So whether we kind of look at safety within a complex system and understand that safety is not an endpoint, it's the constant tensions between profitability, delivering on time, meeting customer objectives, and understanding and navigating those tensions is part of it. I think, and my own learning through my own study has really helped me, and the individuals that I've been privileged to work with have helped me understand that more. I think secondly, understanding that a bit like flavors of ice cream, right? There are different approaches to safety, and that we can perhaps stop arguing so much about one idea or one model is better than the other, that there are different ways of approaching it. If you work in retail or you work in aviation, or there are many different ways of approaching a problem, but we often appear to have the ability to have an argument amongst ourselves about methodology rather than actually the merits and different ways of approaching it and how they can work in different situations. The discussion about context is often missing in favor of having a discussion about tools. So I think if we can actually think about what unites us, but I think equally we need to be probably a little, how can I put it, understanding that some of our approaches are quite dated, and we may need to have a different approach, more contemporary. And I think the third and final thing that I would say was actually learning from other sectors.
Yeah.
I look at the way retail works with data analytics and the information they've got about us in terms of trends and patterns, and think, wow, if we could get some of that. I look at how marketing approaches, how we think about how we target particular audiences, and that would be fantastic to approach it. So I think looking outside of different sectors, I look at philosophy and think, well, they take a very deeper view of ethics. Perhaps we've got a lot to learn in terms of how we approach areas, challenging what we do. So whether it's in academia or whether it's in business and commerce, I think there is a lot that we could learn in terms of how we approach problems, how we define them, and how we frame some of those things.
I really, I couldn't agree more. By the way, that it's an ever evolving. There's no end point, and funnily enough, we're working with Simon Sinek's group who are doing the workshop on the infinite game. There's no end point. There's no fix. There's no finish line. It's constant. And do you think perhaps one of the things we're doing incorrect is looking for the absolute solution, as opposed to kind of working together to toe the line of improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think each organization will try different things, and some will work and some will not work. But that doesn't mean that a particular solution or methodology is right or wrong. It just means that in that particular context, I've worked in oil and gas and high risk sectors, and there are particular methodologies that work in that particular sector because it is absolutely fundamental to who they are, what they do. And if they don't get this right, that may not be the same within a retail sector. So in this constant tension about, which particular methodology is right, we often miss out the context of the organization, how it actually works, and how safety fits as a tension within that organization. So often context is fundamentally missing. And yes, I do think we end up in a debate about methodologies and tools too often.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with somebody else around how these methodologies are siloing the market in a non-competitive profession like EHS, where everybody. I said this online, that we're all we could be like a global boardroom of EHS professionals working in tandem together to learn from one another, to be able to push the dial forward, and in that ever evolving space and improvement of EHS, that is a huge benefit in comparison to any industry or profession. But everybody seems a little bit siloed at the moment, whether it be on safety to behavior or HOP. They are, and we're creating actually divides. We're creating it, and we're creating a tension within tension, which is a bit scary, really, and it could be doing us more harm than good. No.
Yeah, I think the other element to that is not just the constant bickering, but also the lack of actually thinking. One of the good things about concepts like TRIZ that I think is part of your part of your conference that you're looking at, how to innovate, is the idea looking outside at what already works. So there are lots of techniques like positive deviance or appreciative inquiry, where actually you start to actually look at what you want to happen or what is already working and how to scale up that. And you look sideways, so you look at what's working in another particular area. There's a lot, I've already talked about retail analytics, there's a lot we could learn from sports psychology, where how we approach particular problems and how we think about neuroscience. There's a huge amount we could learn from linguistics, the power of words and how words influence us. I mean, we've got lots of kind of metaphors within safety that we use that we don't realize are framing how we think about problems. So one of the things I think that we need to do for those that are involved in safety is look as much outside of safety and start to think about why it's working there and how we could learn from those particular practices, and equally look deeper at the nature of the kind of opportunities and challenges that we got to really understand it. If we look at safety in isolation, as opposed to looking at safety as a tension, then we've got much greater opportunity to kind of bring new, fresh thinking to long-standing existing problems. But we have to be prepared to stop having circular arguments about really kind of quite dated ideas about whether zero or a particular metric. I mean, I tire of how many times I see those conversations because they're not productive.
Really love that. Would you say, James, you rely, or maybe not rely is not the right word, maybe one of the most important things for you is community in terms of what you can learn from others? Would you say that is a fundamental part and task of your growth?
Yeah, I think if I look back at my career, I remember very early on, I was privileged enough to go into a boardroom. And the best piece of advice I ever got was from the company secretary that took me alongside afterwards and says, it's a really good presentation. You really kind of got across very well. Perhaps next time you could ask and just stop and ask for people's own views. Because in my nervousness, I'd ranted for 20 minutes. There's an example of someone with a legal background actually teaching you to actually listen. That's your role, is to start a debate. I think marketing and comms have been pivotal to me to think about how to communicate more effectively. And often it can be the critical friends in my work at Arup. I'm privileged to work with individuals who are so candid but soft in terms of the feedback that they provide, where they're saying, I think you could do this slightly differently. And people are really generous with their advice. And the same in, one of the reasons I use social media, in fact, the only reason I really use social media, is if I look for people's suggestions, feedback for things that I may have missed in my own biases. And I find it really helpful to actually get a different view. So whether it's constructively saying, I think there's a different way of looking at this, or whether someone introduces you to something you hadn't read or thought about before, but it is a community, and the more that community is richer when it's outside of your core discipline, I think the better.
Yeah, because there's a lot, again, a decade we've been doing global series, and again, I'm very, very clear with and precise that I am not a safety professional. Certainly don't have the experience as a frontline EHS professional, but as a backseat view of how the profession has looked in that 10 years, there's a lot of talk around leadership and people talking in leadership culture. What are your thoughts in regards to appetite for learning and development at the sea level? So I'm very aware of the fantastic work and the reading as well. It's very, by the way, it's very encouraging, but also it's motivating because it makes me, I've got loads of books on the shelf more around sort of spiritualism and things like that that help me be better in life, but it does urge me to go and pick it up and learn something new every day. What do you think in regards to your perspective on the market? Is there a lack of want to learn and develop people quite hard in their ways? Do we need to soften as business leaders in the community in order to be able to take that next step forward to innovate the profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the more that we can learn from different disciplines, the better.
Mm.
You've mentioned books on spiritualism, philosophy. I think all of these things are really helpful to actually prompt us to think differently. The conversations around safety culture and leadership are really important, but often they're kind of circular arguments that which style of leadership or what leadership's doing right or wrong, they're not having a kind of conversation that's at a different level. I find the most interesting discussions about those topics are where people take a different view about how people are, leading, and equally how we approach concepts such as culture,
Mm.
and not getting fixated on binary dualisms of whether one kind of, whether safety culture exists or doesn't exist, because
Mm.
that's not really helpful as a discussion. It's another kind of circular argument that just goes nowhere. Whereas if we kind of think, well, if it's useful to someone to believe in a certain idea or practice, why is it useful and how could that be helpful? And why do they hold a different perspective to me rather than actually just arguing with someone?
Yeah.
I'm just not sure that's particularly helpful. But your wider point about learning from concepts like spiritualism, philosophy, psychology, yeah, absolutely. The more, the better. My learning and my studies and just my approach to problems is just so much richer from the more learning. So I generally have a rule that I won't go to a safety conference. I generally don't engage with traditional safety arguments. And the safety conference thing for me is because of just hearing people just with very similar methodologies and approaches on how they're doing things. It doesn't really interest me, and I don't think it's particularly innovative. So actually, when I see I will actively go to things where there are speakers from a different fields who are going to introduce some new ideas to me, which is fundamentally where my development is
Mm.
and where I wanted to go.
Well, you mentioned the circular, right? And this is just, I think that's really relevant and important within health and safety, and maybe where I've seen a bit of same old, right? There's still, right? There's loads of great ideas going around in the circle, but these ideas have been spinning around in the circle for quite some time now. So, and we're seeing this plateau and improvement, or we're not seeing a reduction. Maybe that's because we're just spinning these same ideas round and round and round and round. Now, who's going to break out of that circle, find something new outside of it, outside of where we are? Because it's quite a small, it's not a small profession, there's thousands of EHS professionals all over the world. But my point is, it is quite small in regards to the thought leaders and the innovators that really have changed the game for us over the past 30, 50 years. You got your Heinrich triangles, you've got your Holnagels, Deckers, Todd Conklins, where we maybe need to go and put, I'm probably preempting a loaded question here, but is what do you think we need to see, or what would you like to see or see change within EHS in order for us to sort of break through and continue to move forward?
Well, I think the route to it is to look as much outside of safety. So I mean, I think that's really important. Um, I think if we don't find new ways of approaching it, we will go the route of the quality profession. There was a time when there were quality directors. There was a time when quality was everything. But if you look in organisations now, there are not many quality directors left. That's because it went down a very staid route of ISO and procedures, and quality became synonymous with procedures and process rather than a value to the customer. And we will go the same route if we continue with some quite tired debates. So we need to kind of look, and we need to reframe safety as something about social purpose, equity, fairness. We need to see safety as the link with sustainable development. And we need to bring a greater kind of different perspective to it and understand that there are pluralities of approaches. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means they're different, and understand that context is really key to actually understanding why one particular approach or intervention works and why it may not work in another. And for the profession itself, ideally hope that we kind of have deeper discussions and richer learning, which is about a broader concepts beyond interventions and particular approaches.
So on that, then, that's where what needs to your perspective of what needs to happen. What do you think we're lacking?
Well, I think we're lacking. I think there's not enough actually understanding of a broader societal kind of context in which safety is occurring. There's not enough external kind of learning and thinking about what are the factors that are shaping safety, what are the tensions that exist within, and equally, I don't think there's enough reflection of cognitive diversity, rather than actually, recognizing that difference is to be celebrated. We end up with difference being a point of argument. In some contexts, controversially, behavioral-based safety will work. In some contexts, it won't work. HOP will work, or whatever particular methodology you work. But that is true, right? That there are different methodologies that will work in particular times and periods. Now, many people will get upset because for some reason I just can't understand, they get very wedded to a particular outlook, as opposed to actually saying, what is it about context in one particular circumstances that will make one method work and one method won't work. But I tend to that's probably the one thing I've ever said in the last, I don't know, 3 years about a particular methodology. I'm just less fixated on methodology. I take a more pragmatic approach to things and think in what particular circumstances one thing would work. And I think the other kind of piece is really focusing on value, the value to the worker. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about technology. Almost all of that technology is driven by the benefit to the organization. And yet we all have adopted apps and technology, not because an organization has told us to do so, it's because it's got value to us. What is the benefit to the employee of what it is that we're proposing to do? How do we bring that to the forefront?
Yeah, I like the pragmatic solutions part, dependent on the situation. That's really, I like that idea a lot. I have a question for you. Would you say, and this is just again from an observation perspective, as an events organizer, as a marketeer, as a sales professional, again, I'm an outside looker. I look at what's going on and I evaluate, I analyze, and that helps us basically chair the right solutions and professional solutions to be able to support you with your role. Do you see yourself as a role model to the future of the profession?
No, not at all. I'm just someone that actually spends a lot of time studying and reading. I wouldn't purport to kind of to shape people's thoughts or anything like that. It's purely I'm interested in different views and I'm interested in my own kind of self-learning and development. But no, I'm certainly not. I wouldn't purport to be either this kind of thought leadership or role model or anything like that.
Because you're too humble.
I don't think it's about humble. I think there's something in actually reflecting upon your own development and growth. And I'm really interested in different people's views. I don't do enough reading of different perspectives and different views. That's certainly something I should do and try and seek to understand why others hold a different opinion to me.
And the only reason I ask that is the encouragement for the future of the profession, right? In years to come, in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the future EHS professionals, what they'll look at what we're doing at the moment, senior people within the space, the leaders within the space, they're looking up to them. They're looking up to the views and the kind of the way things are going to evolve, right? So I think it's really fantastic there are people like yourself, and I think it's not to take anything away from that. We all have a role to play for the future of this profession. That's why we're here. So where do you I'm quite excited about, there seems to be quite a lot of millennial movement into EHS. but we have a role to play, right? We definitely have a very important role to play.
Yeah, I think it's a good, right? It's the why people want to care. It's a caring profession. That may be controversial, but it is. It's often not framed as a caring profession, but it doesn't mean that we don't also have to kind of think about what are the compliance and regulatory pieces that we need to address, because those are things that we can't deny. That's often why organizations establish teams to ensure that they care for their people, they do the right thing, and at the same time, they meet legal obligations. So I think if we set this up again as some kind of argument between two, but I'm excited about some of the new ideas coming through, particularly the ideas of using technology, making things sharper, better, and styles of communication that I would have loved to have done 25 years ago. There's a range of kind of different podcast materials coming through that make the whole discussion richer. I think the key thing that I would advocate for, Paul, is that we are more positive in our outlook. So rather than sit there and say, I don't like this or I disagree with that, actually, what do you like? What would you like to see more of? I think there's some kind of elements around appreciative inquiry that could be really helpful for the profession to embrace. There is a lot of kind of negative framing of something to say, I disagree with this approach, or this doesn't work, or people kind of beating up on the safety profession, as opposed to framing it in a positive way and saying, what they advocate for and why they believe a certain method works.
Mm. Humans being humans, right? It's on one breath, again, not mention any names, but I saw somebody who was championing curiosity a week before the week they posted something having a go at somebody saying that something doesn't work. Which is, but we're all human, right? And again, the point of this changing safety is to get a bit honest. And I hope the people that listen to this are just looking at, to coming at this with a curious mindset to like, yeah, maybe I need to do that a little bit more. Maybe I am falling into the trap of being a bit one-sided. Maybe I need to open my heart and my mind a little bit to new views and perspectives and pragmatic thinking. I think that's really important. You kind of answered the question, but I think this, again, a lot of these questions are going to be threaded through Changing Safety podcasts over the next 6 months. And again, I want brutal honesty, but what do you personally, and again, this isn't to call out, but it's more just I think it's important that we all have a voice. What do you personally think of, the safety profession as it stands right now?
Oh, I think it's doing an incredible thing. If I think about what people did through COVID, for many businesses, their safety teams, were pivotal to that. In many areas, yes, we've got challenges with plateauing, but actually, I think people don't go into safety, I generally think, because they want to kind of do anything other than care for people and do things the right way. It does attract a certain mindset, and we've got to be kind of acknowledging of that bias, that there is a desire for certainty and proceduralization, and often a liking for rules that can be a bit somewhat unhealthy. But beating down on people who go into this profession or the mindset, I don't think is particularly helpful at all. So I think there is a lot that the individuals in the safety profession and those involved in the wider kind of risk and governance framework can be very proud of. Equally, I think we've got a lot to do to kind of further improve. The kind of approach I take is to kind of be your own teacher, learn from your own mistakes. If I think back 25 years to what I was doing, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily proud to the approaches I took then. I made some huge mistakes, and I did things that and tried approaches that I think I fundamentally disagree with now. But we've got to learn as we go through it, and reflect on what works and what didn't work, and then what we can take from it, and recognize that we're all kind of work in progress. We're constantly under development.
Love that. And I couldn't agree more. In all honesty, I think sometimes we forget that COVID, what COVID did to everybody, and how strong safety especially in some of those markets, frontline services, how strong they were during that time to keep the
Yeah, I
wheel.
think so. I think the other piece that the profession really needs to gain is critical evaluation.
Yeah.
So there's a lot at the moment where people are very influenced by a thought leader or a guru who says something or has written a certain book. Think critically about what's being said. Look beyond the memes and the simplistic kind of dualisms that you're being presented with, and actually engage and think, right, how would that actually work? Is it as simple as a black and white answer? And then start thinking critically about, are there different views? What are the challenges with doing it this way? We live in a world of grey, right? There isn't black and white, and there certainly shouldn't be black and white in terms of how we approach particular challenges around safety, the proceduralization, human error, and all of those really complex areas. So I think that's what I would cry for the profession, to think more critically, to think deeper, more ethically, philosophically about how it approaches problems, and to embrace the opportunity of change.
Mm. I mean, the ideas, ideas are one thing, implementation's the hard part, right? So, I mean, I'll be honest. So again, I was saying about I've got loads of different books because, I'm going off piece in terms of my religion is Christianity, right? But I've actually read a lot of different religions because there's so many things. So the meditation side is obviously Eastern culture of Buddhism, right? So that has really helped me with my mental health and well-being, although it's frowned upon within my religion. But taking pieces from different things outside of Christianity in different areas of my life has really benefited me. Then there's loads of stuff that I've read. I won't give examples, but like having the time to sit down and go, right, how am I going to implement that into my own work and my own life? And it's really bloody hard. Like, so even if you come across a meme or something fantastic online and you go, wow, I love what you were saying about let's get under the bonnet of that a little bit, because that's number one. And then number two is like, actually, how do I take that and now implement that into my role or into my work life or into my business? That's the hard part, right?
Yeah, I think whether it's a simplistic kind of piece about advice that you've taken around your own well-being, or it's actually a program that you're interested in developing, I think each of those requires some reflection. Sometimes these simplistic kind of statements and ideas are really appealing, but actually really difficult to do. I see stuff, personal advice that people post online, and actually think some of it is, lovely, but actually incredibly difficult to do. And virtues of leaders. I see so many comments on what leaders should be and what they shouldn't be. But all of us, to a certain degree, are leaders within our own context. But I think the solution to implementation is to build a partnership, including those that are supportive and those that are constructively critical. The best advice I get in work, and always have done, is from people who are not in the safety profession. I get fantastic advice, and always have, from communications and marketing specialists. There are individuals within legal or technical who give me really strong advice, and leaders in learning who can help me think about how to frame context. I'm privileged to work with individuals very good in learning and development or technical, who really help me think, and actually we work through the question together. So you've never got the answer to this on your own, and it's about building a coalition of individuals who can help actually think and bring different perspectives to that.
That's the key. Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that links into where we stand. Again, I'm not trying to plug, or maybe I am shamelessly trying to plug, but that's where Global Series are trying to be different. That's where we're trying to build these coalitions, build these groups and networks that, can come together, inspire each other, learn from one another. And how about thinking outside the box now? I mean, that's something we've talked about before. How do you think the profession needs to maybe think outside the box or dare to be different? How would you how do you think why do you think EHS needs to think differently?
I think, the profession tends to go through waves of different approaches. So they adopt and they get very kind of interested in a certain fad or a fashion and we've seen this for years. We went through a process of how we approached error and kind of, human error and thinking about different ways that human error occurred. We then had waves looking at kind of proceduralization, picking up management systems. We've then gone through trends of looking at behavioral-based safety, latterly looking at some of the new ideas that have come through. Each one of those are useful. It doesn't mean that they were necessarily wrong. They took us to another place and a different approach. And I think each one of those actually, to a certain degree, has actually emerged from outside of safety. Proceduralization very much kind of was adopted from quality. Behavioral safety very much looking at kind of what was coming out of psychology. And so I think the more that we can look outside, and I think equally be prepared to try something different. There's a lovely kind of phrase in sociology called isomorphism. It's where everybody converges on a particular approach, whether it's kind of encouraged that they do that or whether they adopt it themselves. I think we need less convergence and more divergence of different approaches, because then we'll get a sense of what's working and what's not working. So I long for kind of the safety profession to try something fundamentally different in an organization that doesn't involve the same kind of procedures and process. But we can actually go in and say, this feels really different in terms of the way they're trying to do this. But we will try and hopefully get some different thinking. But I think to the conference season that you're organizing, I think it's really exciting because the more that we can actually bring that different perspective, a different view on how we approach innovation or how we approach, inspiration and leadership, or how we think about, how incidents have happened and take a different perspective to them. Each one of these and the speakers that you've got will bring a different dimension to it. And what's particularly interesting, exciting for me is almost all of them are not safety speakers. And that's the reason why, I'd be really interested in kind of participating in that. So we'll see. I think hopefully we can get some interest in learning as much outside the core areas.
Fantastic. I'm gonna finish everything with I want you to have a little bit of fun with it, but I want you to be honest. This question would be around, if you were the Picasso, I want you to put yourself in the eyes of Picasso painting the perfect picture. Like, I'll give you an example. If I was to paint a perfect picture of how Global Series was to look in 3 years' time, it would be globally running HSE 3.0 events in every continent around the world, with a team big enough to be able to handle that, not just three of us. But if you were to be the Picasso of the future of the profession and you were to be able to paint it in the best way that you possibly can, how would it look in 3 years' time?
Bear with me. I think something, Paul, that's perhaps a bit colourful and where you can look at it and take different perspectives. For some, it may involve a cat and a fish, but for others, it would involve sunshine. But it's plurality. It's got different views. It's colourful. It's engaging, and it's thought-provoking.
Did you prepare for this question? Because that's a great. Just for the benefit of the viewers on the podcast, James has held up it was a beautiful picture. Actually, it's a very cool picture painting with loads of colours in it and a lovely fish and the sun and stuff like that. And that was just to explain for those that didn't watch on YouTube and are listening on the podcast. Thank you. That was I'm going to challenge everybody now on the podcast to give a better answer than that to that question, because that was pretty good.
All right, good. Well, it's lovely chatting to you, Paul.
Been fantastic. James, again, thank you very much for being on the podcast. We're looking forward to seeing you. I believe you're signed up for HSC UK Congress this year, right?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah,
And what, just before I let you go, what are you looking forward to the most from that event?
I think networking with colleagues and hearing, their views and their perspectives, and learning three things differently. Just hearing from the speakers who've got a totally different view, and three things I can take away that will make me think about how I look at safety and approach it. And hopefully, some ideas and innovation also.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to James Pomeroy for being on today's Changing Safety podcast from HSE Global Series. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, James. Just to give everybody some collateral on who we are and what we do. So Global Series, HSE Global Series, as I say, are one of the market leading B2B events organizations in the EHS and operations space. You can follow us on LinkedIn, which is hseglobalseries.com. That's a / on LinkedIn. And you can also go to our website, which is www.hseglobalseries.com to register for any of our 8 events this year, or if you're a solutions partner looking to come along and play a part providing technology, products or innovation to any of our EHS community, you can get in touch regarding any partnership opportunities as well. Thank you very much again to James Pomeroy for being on the podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you in June for the HSE UK Congress.
Right. Thanks, Paul.
That's it for this week. Absolute massive thank you again to James for joining us for the podcast. And we'll see you in 2 weeks where we'll be back with Marie-Louise Chandler. And if you'd like to know more information about Global Series, you can simply go to our website, www.hseglobalseries.com. Let's think differently, let's dare to be different, and let's change the profession, one conversation at a time. See you in 2 weeks.